Hey everyone, welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving deep into European colonialism in India.
A fascinating period.
Absolutely crucial for understanding India today, and especially important if you're prepping for those UPSC exams. You know, that GS1 paper on modern Indian history.
Definitely a must-know.
It's a massive topic, though.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going to break it down, make it digestible, and hopefully spark your curiosity to learn even more. And hey, before we get started, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any future deep dives.
All right, let's get into it.
So let's set the scene. Imagine Europe before they had a direct sea route to India.
Right. So we're talking about a time when the Roman Empire was on its way out, and the Arabs had a stronghold on those traditional trade routes to the east.
So no easy access to those spices and goods everyone wanted.
Exactly. And that made things incredibly difficult and expensive for Europeans.
They were basically stuck, right?
Pretty much. No direct route to the riches of the east.
It's no wonder they started looking for a way around it.
Absolutely. That frustration, that burning desire for a direct route to India, it fueled the whole age of exploration.
And that brings us to our first key player, Vasco da Gama.
Ah, yes, da Gama.
In 1498, he sails around the Cape of Good Hope and lands in Calicut on the Malabar coast of India.
Talk about a game changer.
Right?
This wasn't just about finding a new sea route. His arrival totally shook up the existing trade dynamics.
Now, I imagine the local ruler, the Zamarin of Calicut, he must have been surprised.
He was initially pretty welcoming, saw potential benefits in this new trade relationship.
But I bet the Arab traders weren't thrilled.
You got it. They had been dominating the region for ages. They weren't exactly happy to share the wealth.
And let's be honest, the Portuguese weren't just there for friendly visits.
Not at all. They came with a clear goal: control the spice trade. They were in it for the money and the power.
They wanted a monopoly.
Exactly. And they weren't shy about using aggressive tactics. One of their key strategies was the blue water policy, also known as the Cartaz system.
So basically a naval trade license that everyone had to get from the Portuguese.
You got it. If you wanted to trade in the Indian Ocean, you had to pay the Portuguese for permission.
It was a bold move.
It showed just how determined they were to control the flow of goods and wealth in the region.
And then we have Alfonso de Albuquerque stepping onto the scene.
A name you won't forget if you're studying for the UPSC.
He took over as governor in 1509 and had big plans for a Portuguese empire in the east.
Albuquerque was a brilliant military strategist. He captured Goa in 1510, which became a vital base for their operations.
Think about this. Goa was the first European territory in India since Alexander the Great.
It's a major point to remember.
And here's something you might not expect. During Albuquerque's rule, he abolished sati.
Really?
Yeah, the practice of widows self-immolating on their husbands' funeral pyres.
Wow, that's fascinating. So even in their quest for power and profit, the arrival of Europeans sometimes led to social reforms.
It shows how complex these interactions were.
Absolutely. We need to look at historical events from different angles, consider multiple perspectives.
And speaking of multiple perspectives, the Portuguese weren't the only ones with eyes on India.
Oh no, the competition was about to get fierce.
Yeah.
Other European powers were sailing in, ready for their share of the action.
The Dutch, for example, they established the Dutch East India Company in 1602.
A formidable force. They set their sights on controlling key ports like Masulipatam and Pulicat.
And of course, we can't forget the English East India Company, the big player in this story.
The one that eventually takes center stage.
Exactly. They got their royal charter from Queen Elizabeth I in 1600, giving them a monopoly on trade with the East Indies.
Initially, they were focused on setting up trading posts, making deals with local rulers.
A more diplomatic approach.
Right, at least at first. But as their influence grew, so did their ambitions. They realized that to truly dominate the trade, they needed more than just trading posts. They needed real power, political and military power.
And that leads us to a pivotal moment, the Battle of Surat in 1612.
The English versus the Portuguese, a clash of titans.
And the English emerged victorious.
A major turning point. It demonstrated their growing strength and signaled their intent to challenge the established order.
And then we have the French East India Company joining the party a bit later in 1664.
They set up their main base in Pondicherry.
Another power hungry for a piece of the Indian pie.
And let's not forget the Danish East India Company, although they were relatively minor players.
They were more focused on missionary activities than on trade or territory.
So we've got a lot of players on the board now. Portuguese, Dutch, English, French. Even the Danish?
A real mix. It's a crowded field,
Yeah.
and the competition is about to get fierce.
The stage is set for a power struggle that's going to shape the destiny of India for centuries to come.
So who will come out on top in this game of empires?
That's the question, isn't it?
We'll find out in the next part of our deep dive. We'll explore how these European powers clashed, strategized, and ultimately how the English East India Company rose to become the dominant force in India.
We'll uncover the key events, the pivotal battles, and the maneuvers that led to the establishment of British rule.
So stay tuned. It's about to get really interesting.
Absolutely. Welcome back to the deep dive. Last time we left off with all these European powers ready to rumble in India.
It's fascinating how those early interactions really set the stage for what was to come.
It's all connected, isn't it?
Definitely. We're talking about centuries of rivalry, ambition, and the long game of empire building.
Exactly. And one figure who really embodied this early strategic thinking was Francisco de Almeida.
The first Portuguese viceroy of India.
That's right. He faced incredible pressure resistance from local rulers' competition from other European powers, even threats from the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt.
So how did he handle all that?
Almeida believed in establishing a strong naval presence in the Indian Ocean. Controlling the seas was key.
That's where his famous blue water policy comes in.
Exactly. It meant forcing every merchant ship to get a license from the Portuguese if they wanted to trade in the region.
Talk about flexing their muscles.
It was a bold move. It gave them an edge for a while, but it also created a ton of friction and led to clashes with the Ottomans and others. It's a classic example of how a short-term strategy can have long-term consequences.
Right. And Almeida also secured Cochin as a Portuguese base.
Crucial for their operations.
And he led them to victory in the Battle of Diu in 1509 against this massive combined fleet.
Ottomans, Mamluks, Gujaratis.
Yeah.
It was a huge win for the Portuguese. It solidified their dominance in the Western Indian Ocean.
But sadly, his time in India ended tragically.
Killed in a skirmish near Mumbai in 1510.
A reminder of the dangers these explorers faced.
Absolutely. But his successor was no less ambitious. Alfonso de Albuquerque?
A name you'll definitely want to know for the UPSC.
He was a visionary leader. He wanted a permanent Portuguese presence in India, and he wasn't afraid to go after it.
He captured Goa in 1510.
Making it the first Portuguese territory in India, a real turning point.
It marked the beginning of direct European control in India, setting a precedent for the future.
And Albuquerque wasn't just about conquest. He introduced reforms, encouraged intermarriage between Portuguese settlers and local women, even abolished sati in Goa.
Wow. So we see this complex mix of motivations playing out.
Right. Conquest, cultural exchange, social reforms. It's a complicated story.
So we've got the Portuguese establishing themselves. But what about the Dutch?
Ah, the Dutch. They were quickly becoming a major force. Their East India Company, established in 1602, was a powerhouse.
They had that strong naval tradition and those efficient trading practices.
They focused on controlling key ports in Indonesia and Southeast Asia, challenging the Portuguese head-on.
And they were willing to use force.
Their capture of Amboina in 1623 was a clear sign of their growing power and the Portuguese decline.
Meanwhile, the English East India Company was making their own moves.
A bit more subtle at first, they focused on securing trading rights and building relationships.
Until that pivotal moment in 1612, the Battle of Surat.
The English crushed a Portuguese fleet there. It was a major victory securing their trading rights in this important port city.
Showing the world that they were a force to be reckoned with.
And as the Mughal Empire started to weaken in the 18th century, the English saw an opportunity.
They started playing the political game, pitting different factions against each other.
And slowly consolidating their power. They were becoming more than just traders. They were a political force.
And that leads us to one of the most famous battles in Indian history, the Battle of Plassey in 1757.
A turning point in British dominance.
The company led by Robert Clive took on the Nawab of Bengal Siraj-ud-Dowlah.
And won a decisive victory, despite being outnumbered.
How do they pull that off?
Well, Clive was a brilliant strategist, but a key factor was betrayal. Siraj-ud-Dowlah was betrayed by Mir Jafar and others within his own ranks.
It weakened his forces and paved the way for a British victory.
A combination of military tactics and cunning political maneuvering.
And the consequences of this victory were enormous.
Mir Jafar became the new Nawab, essentially a puppet ruler under the company's control. It gave them immense power in Bengal, one of the richest provinces in India.
From traders to kingmakers.
Exactly. A dramatic shift in their role.
But they faced resistance, of course.
No, absolutely. Other Indian rulers recognized the growing threat and fought back.
Like Tipu Sultan, the ruler of Mysore.
A legendary figure. He modernized his army, used new technologies, and formed alliances to counter the British.
He even had his own rocket corps.
He was a true innovator and a brilliant military strategist, a real thorn in the side of the British.
But he was eventually defeated and killed in 1799.
His death was a major blow to the resistance against British expansion.
So by this point, the East India Company was essentially running large parts of India,
They had their own army, collected taxes, made laws. It was like a state within a state.
wielding immense power.
And that eventually raised concerns back in England. The British government started questioning the company's accountability, worried about corruption and abuse of power.
All that wealth and power was bound to attract scrutiny.
Absolutely. There were scandals, controversies, and calls for greater oversight.
And this tension between the company and the crown would eventually lead to the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857,
A rebellion that shook the very core of company rule.
a turning point in Indian history.
We'll delve into the details of the mutiny and its aftermath in the next episode.
But for now, we've seen how the Portuguese established themselves, how the Dutch challenged them, and how the English slowly but surely rose to power.
It's a complex and fascinating story filled with ambition, conflict, and far-reaching consequences.
It sets the stage for the dramatic events that would unfold in 1857.
Join us next time as we explore the Sepoy Mutiny and the beginning of the British Raj.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. In the last two parts, we've traced the journey of European powers in India, their ambitions, their rivalries, and their impact. Now, in this final part, we're going to zoom in on a pivotal event that changed everything: the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857.
A rebellion that shook the foundations of British power in India.
It wasn't just a mutiny, it was a full-blown uprising with far-reaching consequences.
Absolutely. It forced the British to completely rethink their approach to ruling India.
So let's unpack this. What led to this explosive rebellion?
Imagine you're an Indian sepoy, a soldier in the company's army. You've seen the company's power grow their interference in local affairs, their disregard for Indian customs and beliefs.
I could see how resentment would build up.
And then came the spark, the introduction of new Enfield rifles.
What was so special about these rifles?
The cartridges. These cartridges were rumored to be greased with animal fat from cows and pigs.
And that was a problem because
It violated the religious beliefs of both Hindu and Muslim sepoys. For Hindus, cows are sacred. For Muslims, pigs are unclean. To bite the cartridge, as you had to do to load the rifle, was seen as a defilement.
So this seemingly small change in weaponry had huge cultural and religious implications.
It was a major blunder. It was seen as a deliberate act of disrespect by the company.
And to make matters worse, the company didn't handle the initial protests well.
Not at all. They dismissed the concerns of the sepoys, fueling more resentment and distrust.
It was a powder keg waiting to explode.
And explode it did. The mutiny began in Meerut near Delhi in May 1857. Sepoys who refused to use the new cartridges were punished, and that ignited a wave of uprisings that spread like wildfire across northern and central India.
So it started with the sepoys, but did others join the rebellion?
Oh yes, disgruntled local rulers, landlords who had lost their lands, peasants burdened by heavy taxation. They all saw this as a chance to strike back at the company.
So it became a much broader movement.
A united front against a common enemy. The rebellion had different leaders and goals in different regions, but the underlying sentiment was the same: overthrow the company, restore Indian sovereignty.
The British ultimately crushed the rebellion, but it came at a cost.
A heavy cost.
Yeah.
Lives were lost on both sides, and the British realized they needed a new approach.
They couldn't just go back to business as usual.
Exactly. The events of 1857 were a turning point. The East India Company was dissolved, and India came under the direct rule of the British Crown. The era of the British Raj had begun.
So the mutiny, although unsuccessful in its immediate goal of overthrowing the company, had a profound impact.
It reshaped the political landscape of India, and it left deep scars, both physical and emotional.
It's a reminder of the complexities of history and the unintended consequences of actions.
It's a story of clashing cultures, religious sensitivities, and the struggle for power.
It's a story that continues to shape our understanding of India today.
And it reminds us that history is not just about dates and battles. It's about people, their beliefs, their struggles, their triumphs, and their tragedies.
And that's what we've tried to explore in this deep dive. We've journeyed through centuries of history. We've seen the rise and fall of empires. We've witnessed the resilience of the Indian people.
We've delved into the complexities of colonialism and its lasting legacy.
We hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to learn more.
Remember, history is not just something we read about in textbooks. It's a living, breathing story that shapes who we are and the world we live in.
Thank you for joining us on this journey through the fascinating and often turbulent history of European colonialism in India.
We hope you'll continue to explore and learn with us.
And as always, if you enjoyed this deep dive, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell so you don't miss out on future episodes.
We're always diving into new topics and uncovering hidden stories.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking questions.
Goodbye.